There's this myth going around that in order to speak English more fluently and communicate effectively, all you need to do is watch a bunch of videos and keep watching and listening to all kinds of stuff until you will magically improve your speaking skills and your confidence. I'm calling bullshit. First of all, greetings from the Arenal volcano right behind me. I've been staying in Costa Rica for the last couple of weeks and I love it. So if you ever have the chance to come here, make sure you spend here at least a few weeks. The nature is amazing. So I cannot tell you how many times people DM me or email me and tell me that they've been practicing English. They've been listening to English podcasts, watching movies, Netflix, reading books, studying a bit of grammar, memorizing vocabulary, but they still can't put sentences together without messing up, freezing up in the middle of a conversation, making mistakes, and most importantly, they can't communicate confidently. So is that strategy of just watching movies really working? At the end of this video, especially for those of you who stay focused until the end, find out why this is happening and what you can do about it, so the next time you speak, you don't struggle with remembering vocabulary and you will walk away with the 3 exact tips I give every one of my students the moment they join our community, which helps them break through their fears and speak English without all that fear, learn vocabulary without all the stress of always worrying about what if they forget it, and speak English having expressions, complex grammar structures even automatically coming out of their mouth. Imagine you have to take a bus to work every single day, going to work, coming back home. I remember I spent 5 years commuting about 40-50 minutes every single day, going to my high school and coming back, taking a bus packed with students. That is dedication, just because the high school I really wanted to go to wasn't in my hometown. Now you get on the bus at the same place and you get off at the same place, and you do this for years, every single day. As a passenger, you can study, you can listen to your English podcast, recall vocabulary using your flashcard app, or do things not necessarily related to English. Are you going to be able to drive that bus, know when to turn left, when to turn right, when to slow down, when to speed up, when to overtake, what to avoid, just because you've been sitting on the bus as a passenger? Then why would you think simply by understanding a lot of English, by watching movies, listening to podcasts, or reading articles, books, is all that you need to help to express yourself better, to communicate more effectively and confidently when it requires different skills? And don't get me wrong, the majority of people learning English are actually able to read pretty well after a while, understand most of the most standard accents, and probably even write well. But when it comes to speaking, they seem to struggle a lot. Not because they can't learn to speak better, but because there are so many misconceptions about how to improve their speaking skills around the internet, and because they make decisions out of fear instead of what I teach my students, which is to make decisions out of possibilities. Because when something is scary, that's not impossible. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Chubby. I'm an English fluency learning and language anxiety coach, and I mainly specialize in helping ambitious professionals, academics, business owners, serious English learners, so they can remember vocabulary way more effectively and can walk into a conversation speaking English more clearly, confidently, freely, and comfortably. So these are topics that you're into and you'd like to find out more about. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can get all the updates I will share, long form, short form videos, challenges, everything else I post on my community page, so you can see massive changes in your fluency and confidence. Just like you need different skills, like the skill of being able to find a place, the skill of buying a ticket, when you are a passenger on that bus. When you're only practicing understanding English, you're practicing the skills an English learner needs to eventually understand English better. Effective English communicators, on the other hand, also focus. I'm not saying you should not listen, like listening has been a life changer. Ever since I started listening massively to a lot of content, I was able to improve my fluency, speak way more clearly, and remember more expressions and speak naturally. If I look at my most successful students in the last 17 years, they all focused on the exact 3 skills that we are going to talk about in this video. Skills that they need to say words out loud putting them together to make sentences, to be able to communicate with other people. Skills that eventually help them with what most people's goal is with learning English, which is to learn to communicate effectively, to put sentences together without all that stress and overthinking. If you're curious about what exact skills an effective English communicator focuses on, something that I drew a lot of inspirations from my most successful students and also from my own life and my own experience learning to speak English, download my free ebook where I put together everything that makes an English learner really successful at learning to speak English and making progress, and learning English without all that unnecessary stress. In the Proficiency Fortress, which is my signature fluency community that has helped hundreds of people overcome their fear of making mistakes and speak English confidently. Right now we have people from more than 20 countries. There is a specific type of class called Speaking Booster where we don't just practice randomly speaking and talking about things. We dedicate this type of class to helping my students remember more vocabulary and construct better, more complex sentences by focusing on these 3 skills: optimization, vocabulary recall, and speaking training. The materials that you might be looking at, this is something I talk in much more detail about in a previous video I've made, could be way too difficult for you. So your brain isn't going to absorb a lot of the grammar and vocabulary you're learning from what you consume. It's like somebody going to the gym maybe in their first couple of weeks and trying to lift 40 kilograms without any sort of previous experience when they can only lift up 3 kilograms. Remember that what goes on, the learning processes, this is super important, in your brain is your responsibility. Similar to how you need to pay attention to your position, the way you're lifting that weight up, basically how you do a certain workout at the gym, having the right focus and attention and making your brain go through the learning processes for effective learning will get you better results with your fluency as well. And because it's so simple and a lot of people were never taught how to learn effectively, most struggling English students miss it. Now I teach my students over 10 specific ways they can remember vocabulary in a conversation and what to do if they happen to forget vocabulary as well, so we don't end up freezing up in the middle of a conversation. Here I'm going to share with you one of the most powerful ones. First, the goal of learning vocabulary isn't to understand vocabulary. Millions of people focus way too much on just understanding vocabulary, and it never becomes part of what makes us remember vocabulary, which is our long-term memory. Because when we have a conversation and we don't have experience of seeing that vocabulary, we don't know how that vocabulary is used, we only recognize that word because we can only understand it, we're going to have difficulties remembering that vocabulary. And it's pretty simple, but the reason most struggling English students don't remember vocabulary is because they don't create a memory out of that vocabulary. Whenever we watch a short video, for example with my students in class, or listen to a short excerpt from a podcast, I always ask my students this one question first. Which of these expressions do you find useful for you? Now this might be different to every single one of my students because we all live in a different reality, we all have different goals. Some people want to move to California. Another student of mine really wants to start a new life, start university in Manchester. Always look for expressions, sentences that are relevant to our reality, to our lives, that we can imagine using in a future conversation. Or if we can't, we make it relevant. Here's another mistake a lot of people make, especially when people read in English. They write down every single expression that is new instead of focusing what they already understand, but they might not have activated or have been using in their regular conversations. I talk about this a lot. What helped me improve my confidence in general wasn't getting obsessed with learning hundreds and hundreds of words, especially memorizing them, because I wasn't creating memories of using that vocabulary. Built a strong foundation of learning the most important words, the most relevant words that I can start using. Then as I kept having conversations in English, and as I was keeping on watching movies, listening to podcasts, reading books, I was able to integrate more and more vocabulary into my conversations. Less is always more. Focus on 3 to 5 expressions from every single content piece you're consuming. Now, the next question I ask my students is the question a lot of people don't ask themselves, which is, how can you remember this phrase or this expression the next time you need it? Creating that connection, that cue that has the potential to help you remember that vocabulary the next time you need it. What gives an immense boost to your memory and helps you remember more vocabulary is when you actively engage with the vocabulary you're learning so your brain can process it. Because memory is ultimately all about creating connections, associations between something new, like a new phrase, a new expression, and something you already know. As an example, watch carefully the next excerpt from a video my students have access to in their course portal.
Do you care enough to treat your employees as well as you treat your customers? When your employees are happy, they're more willing to go the extra mile for your customer. They're willing to bring forth great ideas, and they're more willing to collaborate to make whatever it is they're trying to solve or do even better.
Go the extra mile. If you look at the examples, if you are paying attention, you could probably guess this from context, means do your best. Bring the best out of you. Something I teach to every one of my students is the key to success. After picking out the vocabulary, my students simply start using this vocabulary, asking questions, creating stories, making sentences, mini dialogues, planning out those mini dialogues together, connect the vocabulary with a past experience they had or with someone they already know. Again, we want to focus on relevance. How is that vocabulary relevant to you? For example, in class, we ask each other questions like, how do you go the extra mile at work? Or who in your life is someone who always goes the extra mile? The third skill every effective English communicator builds in our community to be able to speak English more fluently, more naturally, without making too many mistakes is speaking training. Just like dancers rehearse a lot before their performance, or guitar players rehearse playing the guitar before their performance, you can train yourself to express your thoughts better with words and then put those words into sentences. I've never taught grammar. You will never see me teach grammar, having the whiteboard behind me and then explaining all kinds of grammar rules, because it does not work. I haven't learned any of them by focusing on getting obsessed with grammar rules or completing exercises. I built my grammar knowledge because of what I teach my students, because I was being exposed to that grammar structure used in a real conversation or real context. Something that's called spaced learning is your friend here. All of my classes are designed in a way that they are consistently feeding my students with grammar structures that they need, expressions they can communicate with, and vocabulary that's going to be useful for them in their real life conversation. An example could be some of the expressions we've recently looked at with my B2 plus kind of pre-advanced learners that help them compare things in more advanced ways. Things like, working from home is way more productive than working in the office. The old printer was every bit as reliable as the new one. This year's bonus is nowhere near as high as last year's. The stress of meeting deadlines is nothing like as bad as dealing with admin. You can choose whichever structures you want to remember based on your current level of English, because we can see things like way is going to be much easier for you to process, practice with, than expressions like nothing like as. Simply practice making similar sentences, integrating them into dialogues, and then having conversations with other people when you're literally training your brain to remember this phrase or expression. Then this is the most important, because all I care about is helping my students remember that vocabulary in the long term. So they don't just remember it while they are taking that course, but it's going to be part of their active vocabulary for the rest of their lives. And as we go through specific activities, they can actively recall that vocabulary, so they don't need to look at it all the time. They actually remember it, and then they can start using it, which is something that takes a bit of practice, but that's one of the most important skills effective English communicators practice, so they can remember and bring new vocabulary into their conversation. And as we go through, dialogues, speaking practice, sentences, storytelling, my students are more and more capable of using those expressions as we practice with the spacing effect over time. So grammar is not acquired by looking at the rules, practicing exercises, saying a couple of words, because part of learning is sleeping, repetition, and relevance, as we talked about before. The combination of these and all the other effective memory techniques that I teach to my students is what helps them remember those expressions, use those new structures in their real conversation. So if your goal is to speak English fluently, not just to understand it and communicate effectively, you need to make recalling vocabulary actively and practicing speaking, training your speaking skills before you have those events when you actually have to use English, your number one priority. So you can keep vocabulary in your long-term memory and have access to it anytime you want. This is not necessarily a topic that's often talked about, so if you're looking for other videos on exactly what to do, what to focus on, how to learn more effectively, specific activities you could do, check out my other 2 videos where I mention everything you need to know about this, and let me know if you have any questions, or you can leave a comment with your burning questions and I'll reply to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching this. I appreciate you. Have a lovely rest of your week, an incredible rest of your day. And if you're curious, if you're curious about what exact skills, or leave a know where to go, where to turn left, where to turn right. Could be way too difficult for your could be way too difficult. So the third skill every effective English communicator can use events, as we talked about before, the combination of these is be way too difficult for you, is likely not to be. A lot of people miss this.